Welcome to No Border, No Country. And today we have with us Art Del Cueto, former Border Patrol agent and current advisor to FAIR, who is an expert on border security and immigration law enforcement operations. And we are going to talk about all this craziness going on across the country with resistance to ICE enforcement actions and protests. How's it going, Art?
I'm good, man. Just a little bothered when you start seeing the news and all these protests, and it frustrates me. I watch this, and I think it's kind of like when you're a so-called expert in something, and you're watching a movie, and you can see the way things are done in a movie, and you sit there and oh, they could have done this, and this is what they should have done. I think that's how I stand now when I'm seeing these protests and what the media is putting out. I think we're not doing a good job, and by we, I mean the people that are pro law enforcement that are, that they realize what needs to be done. We're not doing a good job of exposing the stories because all you keep seeing on the news is one, the protests, but then you see, the mom and the older gentleman, the older lady getting arrested by ICE. And people need to realize there's a story behind that, right? So there's tactical enforcement that's being done throughout the country. There's a list that Border Patrol and ICE have on who they detain, who they don't detain. And at the same time, once you arrest those people, there's other people in the household that are also here illegally. You have to detain them. Those people, as horrible as it sounds, but they have a tendency to snitch on other people, for lack of a better term. And they'll point the finger. I mean, it happens all the time. You arrest somebody and they're quick to say, I work in such and such a place, and there's other people that are here illegally. Or they'll say, my neighbor's doing this person's doing that. And that's, of course, that turns out to be fruits of the poisonous tree. And that's why you're seeing all these other individuals that are being arrested that may not have the criminal record of the original person that they were going after, but certainly they're also here illegally. We also have to remember that some of those people that are being detained and the phones are coming out when they're screaming and crying, those individuals are the ones that entered, asked for asylum, and now they're being taken to prove their asylum claim. A lot of them are not, they don't have a claim, so they get deported. But I think that's what's causing so much of a shift and confusion. Because I speak to people all the time that are very much in favor in protecting our borders, but then they see those clips and it pulls on your heartstring. We need to do a better job of explaining why we're doing what we're doing.
One of the things that drives me crazy about this is that artificial distinction between people with a criminal conviction and people who are here just illegally. Because, I've heard a lot of different explanations for why that's an erroneous distinction, and they're all correct. But the one that nobody ever says is every single one of those illegal aliens with a criminal conviction was at one point an illegal alien without a criminal conviction. And if somebody had enforced the immigration laws before they committed a crime, we wouldn't have had people in the United States become a victim of that crime.
No, absolutely. Look, I use the DUI scenario, or I'll use the speeding on our freeways as a scenario. Do you have to enforce the law once an accident happens, or do you have to enforce the law once somebody loses their life? Or do you try to show that there's consequences for breaking the law in itself? And that's what it comes down to. If you catch a DUI driver, you don't just, not do anything about it because he didn't cause an accident. Speeding's the same way, there's some type of consequence. Well, I think it's the same with this immigration matter. Do you just ignore the person that's here illegally because they haven't committed a serious crime? And I think everyone across the board can agree that you need to make sure that you enforce those laws and add consequences to prevent further laws from being broken.
One of the things I find sickening about these clips that are all over the place now of these demonstrators against ICE and Border Patrol agents is that they're clearly trained in tactics. They're trying to bait the agents into assaulting them on camera. They're blocking the ICE vehicles from getting from A to B. And the slightest inclination of physicality, they drop to the ground and act like they've been horribly wounded or something. When the reality is you see them throwing big rocks at windows of ICE and Border Patrol vehicles. They're clearly trying to get their information to dox them. What can be done about this? Because they're trying to get a reaction. They're trying to manipulate the public to make it look like these government agents are menacing them when the reality is the opposite. But is there anything that can be done?
I think what needs to be done is exactly what you're talking about. We need to spread the message. The agency themselves needs to do a better job of spreading the message and saying something. The problem has always been, especially within Border Patrol, where I worked at for over 2 decades, is that by the time you get the message out and the story of what actually happened, well, the rumor's already gone. The story, the headlines have already been out there. They need to jump on these stories right away and have an explanation, because you're absolutely right. Look, I've seen it and I've been involved where you're trying to detain somebody, they're acting belligerent, they're attacking you, they're in your face, they're sometimes, as we've seen in the news, they're throwing objects. And then when you decide to detain them, that's when the cameras come out. You have to get physical with them to detain them, to handcuff them, and you start hearing the crowd start screaming, going, "You don't have to do that. They're complying. What are you doing? Why are you doing this?" Well, they won't show you the other end of what's going on. And I think that's where we need to jump on it. And we, as us together as an entity, but more so, the agency needs to jump and be able to give a response and clarify these stories immediately as they're happening. And perhaps sometimes it's going to take them jumping and putting out the story before it gets out and gets blasted through all of social media, because that's what's happening. And I think that's why we're seeing sometimes a change in sentiments throughout the country of, well, yeah, I voted for this, but I don't know yet because of what I'm seeing. Well, what you're seeing is not the entire story, and the entire story needs to be broadcast. And who better than the agency who's committing the actual act themselves of detaining these people?
Right. And when you see those videos in full context, these agents are showing incredible patience and professionalism.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, more than most people could ever demonstrate, because they're being, again, egged on, baited to do something, which they show incredible restraint. And then, like you said, they show that final clip that, if you don't have that full context, looks very misleading.
It definitely does. Look, and I've spoken to agents that have been on patrol and been involved in some of this enforcement down in Los Angeles. I also spoke to some that were in Chicago, and they themselves said that they were put in a very dangerous situation where they were severely outnumbered, but they took they made the decision that instead of going after him or pulling out their weapon and having a potential deadly force situation, instead what they did is they chose to de-escalate it by removing themselves by that position. And that's very commendable, because I can tell you, I'm seeing some of this, and aside from that, I'm hearing the stories from the agents that are there directly. And any one of these situations could have turned into a deadly situation very, very quickly.
So I want to run a couple things past you. There's a lot of mythology that's going on. So, the first thing, there's nothing that prohibits anybody working in federal law enforcement from wearing a mask, is there?
Right. No, absolutely not. And it's funny that you say that, because several years ago during the pandemic, in fact, they were told that they had to wear the mask. You weren't allowed to be at in the federal buildings without the mask itself. When agents were out in the field, they were wearing masks. I can tell you that I myself was able to provide close to 3,000 different gaiters with the green color with the Border Patrol writing on the front of the mask, and I would hand them out to agents out in Tucson sector. It was encouraged, and people wanted them to wear them. And I think it's the right thing to do, especially right now when you mentioned this doxing. I myself have been a victim of it several times. I get hate mail all the time through my social media. I received a lot of it even when I was still an agent. And you have people out there that they don't care. And I think we need to point the finger at some of the leadership. I'm in Tucson. There was a protest here a couple weeks ago. The mayor was there at this protest, and she was speaking to a bunch of individuals, and she was reminding them and telling them, you don't have to comply. You don't have to obey. When you're hearing that message from somebody that people, whether I like her politics or don't, but people admire her, and she's in that leadership position, you have a lot of individuals that, they're impressionable when they hear these words. So they say, look, my mayor is telling me I don't have to comply. My mayor is telling me I don't have to obey. They're going to go out there and act in a criminal way. And some of these people, they're not mentally stable, and they're going to, go as low as to cause harm to other people. And I think that's the irresponsibility of a lot of these leadership. And agents and ICE should at least be able to, protect their identity, because you got a lot of crazies out there. And unfortunately, there's leadership that is okay with leading these crazies to get more crazy.
I've heard numerous people say they're wearing those masks because they're ashamed of the work they're doing, because they know they're doing such horrible things. When the answer, the real answer, is right in front of their faces. It's because of you, because people like you are going to dox them and threaten their families. That's why they have to wear a mask.
Unfortunately, you're right. Look, and I'll tell you, I grew up in Douglas, Arizona, so I still have, like, my old house down there. Somebody thought I still lived there, and for whatever reason, they chose that they should go vandalize it. And that house was vandalized, and there was swastikas spray painted across the house. I don't live there no more. But you had some radical idiot that went as far as to say, well, maybe he does. Maybe there's a connection. I have no connection with living in that household, but that's what we're trying to avoid. And you have all these agents that are out there. Everyone's got a cell phone. They're filming them. They're looking at their name. They're trying to find, some type of face recognition, and they're just blasting their information everywhere. So now, not only are they in danger, but their families in danger. You've heard stories of some of the leadership within DHS that have had to move out of their house and live in separate areas away from their families because of these threats. It's a crazy world we live in. And you're absolutely right. They're not covering their faces because they're ashamed of it. They're covering their faces because there's crazies out there that don't understand the way the law works.
So myth number 2, everybody's an internet lawyer now. Do you have to show anybody in the public a warrant when you are arresting somebody?
No, that's funny you say that. Everyone's an internet warrior. I worked for the state prison for many years, and everybody that's incarcerated seems to be an attorney as well. But you're right; it's spread to the internet. And look, you're making an arrest. You're detaining somebody. If I see somebody committing a crime and I have to arrest them as a law enforcement officer, do I have to go get a judge to give me a warrant before I arrest the person? The answer is that simple. But yeah, right. Everyone's an attorney now. Everyone thinks they know what they're doing. And I think that's what it is. It's so much misinformation out there, and it spreads like wildfire. So everybody wants to be able to say, hey, you're doing this wrong. This is not the way it's done. But you absolutely do not need a warrant to make an arrest, especially when you know a crime's being committed.
Well, you're certainly under no obligation to show that warrant to Karen, who shows up and gets in your face and demands and says, I got to show you a warrant. Now, similar thing. Badges. Do you got to show them no stinking badges?
Yeah. So I think a lot of these guys, they have their badge out. It's obvious, right? You can see that the badge is either embroidered on their uniform. I know the ICE agents carry the badge on their hip. I mean, what do I need to show it to? I guess would be my answer is it's right there. You see it. What is it you want me to have to show? You want me to stop and have you take a picture of it? It's, who they are. They're law enforcement, and it's just more and more of this obstacles that people are trying to put because they want to get their point across. You see and I saw it. I recently saw some comments where agents were detaining somebody. They were in full uniform. They had their badges, embroidered to on their shirts, and you had somebody commenting and saying they won't show their badges. Well, they're not covering their badges. It's right there. So that's another silly remark that I hear all the time from these protesters.
Okay, so final one of these myths, and this one drives me crazy. ICE and CBP don't have any jurisdiction over U.S. citizens. Totally false, if I remember my federal law correctly.
Absolutely. I can tell you in the 2 decades that I worked in the Border Patrol, I arrested many U.S. citizens, either for trafficking drugs into the country or for bringing illegal aliens into the United States or further within the interior. So, no, you're absolutely right. You're committing a crime. Border Patrol, ICE, they can absolutely detain and arrest U.S. citizens.
All right, so we're going to take a look at a clip of some of the stuff that's going on in the street and see if we can get your reaction on it, Art.
Isn't it funny though? It seems like the word has gone out ever since George Floyd. If you're apprehended by the police, just say you can't breathe.
Can't breathe. That's the one that the wording that you hear all the time, because that gets them more views, and at the same time that makes their argument larger. Say, hey, you heard him, he couldn't breathe, but the agents didn't care. That's what it comes down to. You will notice that just like we were talking about, the filming is well after whatever incident would have occurred to cause this reaction. You're seeing that now he's being detained. And it's insane to me because sometimes I've been in those situations when I'm trying to arrest people and I tell them, hey, give me your hand. Like you need to comply. And they say, I'm not complying. I'm not going against you. The whole time they're hiding their arms on their chest. They won't give you their hands. Honestly, that's where the big problem is. As a law enforcement officer, you're behind this individual and you may have some type of control, but if you don't have control of their hands, you don't know if they have a gun underneath them, if they had it in their waistband, if it's a knife, whatever it can be. It puts law enforcement in a bad situation. But again, it's like we've been talking about. The protester, you'll see the film, and it's after the incident that caused this reaction from the law enforcement officer. And at the same time, what are we hearing, and what is it that people are going to talk about? He was screaming, "I can't breathe," and the officer refused to get off of him. Again, it's the media, it's these individuals that are out there protesting. I gotta take my hat off to them. They know what they're doing because they're pulling on those heartstrings. We need to jump in front of these stories and explain what actually happened.
Like we said, it's all about optics with them. They want that clip that looks like they're being menaced by these agents. But in your experience, Art, how much of this are legitimately dangerous Antifa types, and how many of them are theater kids looking to be overly dramatic and get that optic?
So when you're seeing the individual that's being detained, I think he wants the clicks and the TikTok vibes and the Instagram and everything else. And he's just being over dramatic, but you don't know who else is in the crowd. Like I said, we don't know who's stable mentally and who's not. We have leadership that are telling people don't obey, don't comply, and then these situations can escalate tremendously. So you don't know. You have that individual detained, and you have some type of control over him, but you don't know who's in the crowd. You don't know their mental stability. You don't know what they're going to do. So situations like this can turn deadly, very dangerous, very quickly.
So a couple of observations. First, a lot of people in our audience might not know this, but I think everyone in law enforcement knows this, and certainly everyone that's worked fire EMS. I spent many years working on an ambulance. If you can yell, "I can't breathe," you can breathe, because if you can talk, you can breathe. That's a given. So that's a little ridiculous. It's gotten overused. But looking at that particular incident, so that person rammed his car into law enforcement officers in the process of enforcing federal law. And again, unless I forgot my federal law, there's a whole lot of things going on there. So there's obstruction of federal process. A car is a deadly weapon because it weighs, 4,000 pounds and can kill people. And you have people complaining when all these officers are trying to do is do their job, and they've just been confronted with somebody who, whether he thinks it or not, as far as the law is concerned, tried to kill them.
Right. No, and one of the things that I continuously see and I ask questions is, so this person was detained, they obviously were arrested, but how did they get prosecuted? What is the prosecution? And there's a clip that went out there. I saw it a while ago. There was a protester in one of these events, and he was getting in law enforcement's face. And at some point, he got detained. And I don't know if you guys have seen that clip, but then the next clip that they show of him is in the detention facility, and he's kind of sitting in a chair, and he's crying, and he's shaking. He's physically shaking. He's scared that he's there. And only to find out a week later, there's another clip of this individual that had been detained, been arrested, that got physical with law enforcement, shaking in his boots, per se. All of a sudden, he was back out there protesting, back out there, bad-mouthing agents and getting in their faces. So what is coming of these arrests? what are the prosecutions looking like? And I hope that somebody can look into it and actually say, hey, there's got to be real consequences, because if you're just detaining him, bringing him in, paper arresting him, which you guys are familiar with, and then kicking him out the door, well, then there's no consequence for their actions. They're going to continue to do, attacking, and they're going to continue to protest and just pretty much not respect law enforcement in any way, shape, or form.
And let's be forthright about what's going on here. They are trying to manipulate public opinion against the Trump administration's immigration agenda so that it gets unpopular enough that the administration backtracks on some of what they're doing, which I don't think, knowing Trump, he's going to do that. But that's really the heart of all this. It's not necessarily
exactly
to stop. Yeah, it's not to stop a vehicle or a particular operation. It's to turn the public against policies that they really do support.
Absolutely. That's exactly what they're doing. And you're right. I don't think that at this point, well, you can't turn back and say, okay, we're not gonna arrest people that are here illegally. That's not an option at this point. But I think we need to do more of explaining it, because you're right. They're trying to change public opinion, and by changing that public opinion, they're trying to be able to control future elections with people that may have been on the fence and have said, hey, I'm tired of seeing crime in our cities, but now they're seeing people that are getting arrested and the forms of the arrest. So they're saying, well, maybe that's not entirely the way I want it to happen. Well, I mean, it's either or. Either you want criminals off the streets, either you want people that have broken our laws detained and having their day in court, which is what's happening, I might add. Look, I've arrested hundreds of thousands of people in my career. And every time that you arrest them, they're upset that they're getting arrested. You bring them into the detention facility. When you're doing the paperwork, one of the documents that you give these individuals is a document with numbers and names of attorneys that they can contact and they can talk to. So the due process is being looked at. It just so happens that the millions that came in under the last administration and that were asking for asylum, they didn't have an asylum claim. I've been screaming it to the top of my lungs. Your economical situation doesn't deem up an asylum claim into the United States.
Amen. Now, one of the things that has come up out of this a lot is there's this media created impression that everybody at ICE and CBP is mean and is a government enforcer, and that there's this mistreatment of these folks. Now, my experience, I worked at INS, I worked at ICE, I worked at USCIS. My experience is the people working for those organizations are professionals. And so when somebody is resisting arrest, they react accordingly. But after that, and it's all done, that person is a human being in legal custody in the US. And most of the people that I worked with were kind and respectful. If you need a bottle of water, they get you a bottle of water. Really doesn't mean anything to the people working in these jobs that this person broke the law. It's an issue of legal status. So these people are all being put into the standard U.S. justice system and treated just like anyone else.
Absolutely. Look, there's a use of force pyramid. And obviously, sometimes you escalate, sometimes you de-escalate. You don't have to go from 0 to 1 to 2 all the way up. You can go from 0 to 10, right? Depending on the situation. But you can also go from 10 back to 0. And I've seen it many times. And you're right. It is upsetting when you're hearing the stories and they're pointing the finger at the men and women of Border Patrol, of ICE, and all law enforcement, to be honest. It's upsetting because I've worked with every single agency you can think of. And I've worked alongside some of the finest men and women that wear the uniform, that take the oath, that want to do the right thing, that they want to go after criminals. That's what it comes down to. I've seen Border Patrol agents out in the middle of the desert that have given their own food to some of the people that have been detained, myself included. I've given my own, lunch to people that we've detained. We're trying to do the right thing. We have that human, element. But at the same time, we have to detain these people when they're committing a crime. That's what it comes down to. And I have countless stories of where I've detained people. I've brought them to the detention facility. And when I'm there, they've said, oh, well, you're different than you were when you were out there. Well, you know why I'm different is because you're different now that you're in the detention facility as well. And that's what it comes down to.
Amen. And I witnessed the same thing at ICE when they would do the flights for the unaccompanied children
Yes.
being returned home. We used to pass the hat. and people would throw in money so that we could buy these kids McDonald's before they were put on a plane and make sure that they had a meal. And I never hear the media talking about that.
You know, this is a funny one, and I'm just going to share this with you. I detained, it was sometime during the middle of my career. I must have had like 10 years in. I detained a group of 8 individuals in the middle of the desert. When I was bringing them back to the station, they themselves said that they hadn't eaten for days, that they were hungry. I went through a drive-through and I bought lunch for every single individual that was in that van, in the detention van for me. And I told them, when you go back to Mexico, what are you going to say? Are you going to say that you ran into a nice border patrol agent that bought you lunch? And they all said the same thing. They said, "Absolutely no, senor. We're gonna continue to spread the message that you guys are not very nice to us."
Art, you're killing this stereotype of the jackbooted thug who's mistreating all these asylum seekers. Yeah.
It's funny because I hear it all the time, and people will see me and they'll comment on my page, and they're constantly saying, "Oh, he's trying to portray something that he's not." Look, I worked as a firefighter when I first started getting into this type of field. I worked in the state prison for a long time. I never mistreated inmates there. I worked with the Border Patrol for over 2 decades. And did you ever see mistreatment? I think I saw more mistreatment by individuals themselves in the holding cells and in the jails than I ever saw mistreatment by the law enforcement officers.
Yeah, and the government takes that stuff seriously. I mean, having worked as an attorney for these organizations, complaints are taken very seriously, and the consequences if you've engaged in misbehavior are pretty severe and
Yeah,
significant.
oh yeah, no, trust me. I heard Internal Affairs as a union representative, through some type of in my career with the prison and with the Border Patrol, you'd hear Internal Affairs all the time. They'd turn around and we have to investigate everything, no matter how small or how big that case is.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on with us. It's always wonderful to hear your perspective. Is there anything else you want to leave the viewers with as we go forward with this craziness?
Absolutely. Look, we're talking about the craziness. We're talking about the message and what social media has continued to do. You have individuals out there that they clearly have an objective to make law enforcement look bad. They want to put their own narrative in. The best thing that the viewers can do is when you see clips like this, when you see what FAIR is doing across the United States, you need to start sharing the clips. You need to start sharing what FAIR is about, because at the same time, we need to be able to send out a real message. We're not trying to sway anyone and say this side is right and that side is wrong. People need to do their own investigation and see the reality. And through these types of podcasts, through these types of shows, and through these types of organizations, I think that's how we get the message out. It's not about the left. It's not about the right. It's about getting the truth out there to the American public.
And I'll close by saying people might see you here, Art, and say, I kind of recognize that guy from somewhere. Art is a workhorse. He's been out there all over cable news and all over media representing FAIR and sharing his expertise. So it's greatly appreciated, Art. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
As always, it's a pleasure. Thanks, Art.